Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that just when you finally begin to believe your life is changing, everything suddenly seems to push back against you? The opportunities slow down. People begin to misunderstand you. Old fears that you thought had disappeared somehow find their way back into your mind. It feels confusing because you expected peace. Yet what arrived first was pressure. Most people see these moments as proof that something has gone wrong. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the resistance you're experiencing is not a sign that you're moving away from your future, but evidence that you're standing at the edge of it? Tonight, I want to share three signs that quietly appear before a person steps into a completely different version of life. These signs are rarely recognized while they're happening. They often look like setbacks, uncertainty, or emotional discomfort. Yet beneath each one is an invitation to become someone your old identity could never imagine. By the end of our time together, you'll understand why the greatest transformations rarely begin with obvious success. You'll see why your assumptions are tested before they're rewarded, why your inner world is challenged before your outer world changes, and why the person you're becoming must first learn to remain steady when nothing outside seems to agree, because greatness is never handed to someone who still believes they are small. It begins the moment you stop asking the world for permission to become who you already are. Think about the strongest tree you've ever seen. You probably admired its height, its branches, and the way it stood unmoved while storms came and went. But what you didn't see was the invisible work happening beneath the surface. Before that tree could rise toward the sky, its roots had to grow deep enough to survive winds it had never experienced. Nature never builds outward before building inward. Your life follows the same law. When your foundation is becoming stronger, the surface often feels unstable. Old habits begin to fall apart. Familiar routines no longer satisfy you. Conversations that once energized you now leave you feeling empty. Even your own thoughts seem unfamiliar. This can be frightening. The mind loves what is familiar, even when the familiar is limiting. That's why so many people unknowingly choose predictable disappointment over uncertain possibility. They remain loyal to an identity that no longer fits because it feels safe. But growth has never asked for comfort. It asks for honesty. It asks you to notice how often you've mistaken familiarity for truth. Many people spend years believing they are waiting for life to change. In reality, life has been waiting for them to stop arguing with the possibility of becoming someone new. This brings us to the first sign that you're about to be tested into greatness. The first sign is that your old identity begins fighting for its survival. This doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it appears as unexpected self-doubt. You wake up questioning your abilities. You suddenly remember failures you haven't thought about in years. Your mind starts replaying conversations where someone underestimates you. You begin wondering whether you've been unrealistic all along. It feels incredibly convincing. And that's exactly why so many people turn around. They believe these thoughts arrived because they're moving in the wrong direction. But consider another possibility. What if those thoughts were always there? What if they were simply quiet? Because you weren't asking anything greater from yourself. The moment you decide to expand your life, every hidden belief you've carried beneath your awareness becomes visible. It's like turning on a light in a room that's been dark for years. The light didn't create the dust. It revealed what was already there. Your imagination works the same way. The instant you begin imagining a larger future, every belief that contradicts that future rises to the surface, not to punish you, to be released. Many people don't realize this. They think confidence means never experiencing doubt. Real confidence is something much quieter. It's the ability to continue choosing a new assumption, even while doubt is speaking. Imagine standing before a mirror every morning. If the reflection looked tired, you wouldn't spend hours trying to polish the glass. You would understand that the reflection simply follows whatever stands before it. Yet this is exactly what people do with life. They spend years trying to polish reflections. They chase approval instead of changing self-worth. They seek recognition before recognizing themselves. They wait for evidence before creating belief. The mirror cannot move first. Neither can your outer world. This realization changes everything. Your circumstances are not interviewing you to determine whether you deserve your future. They are revealing what your deeper assumptions still believe. That realization can feel uncomfortable because it removes the habit of blaming everything outside yourself. But it also gives you something priceless, freedom. Because if your assumptions helped create yesterday, they can also create tomorrow. The challenge isn't learning another technique. The challenge is remaining faithful to an identity that has not yet become visible. That faith is where the testing begins, not because life enjoys making things difficult, because certainty cannot exist until uncertainty has been faced. Imagine climbing a mountain covered in thick morning fog. You can only see a few steps ahead. If you demanded proof of the entire path before taking another step, you would remain exactly where you started. Yet every experienced climber understands something. Beginners often forget. The path reveals itself through movement, not before it. Life behaves the same way. Clarity follows commitment. It rarely arrives first. This is why people who appear fearless are often not free from uncertainty at all. They have simply stopped requiring certainty before taking action. They've learned that identity is built through repeated choices, not emotional perfection. Every time you respond differently than your old self would have, you're quietly introducing your subconscious to a new version of who you are. That process isn't loud. There are no fireworks, no audience applauding your private decisions. Only a quiet moment where you choose peace instead of panic, patience instead of desperation, faith instead of fear. Those moments seem small, but they're shaping a future that hasn't yet become visible. And that leads to something even more surprising. Sometimes the greatest test isn't whether you can believe when life is difficult. It's whether you can continue believing when absolutely nothing appears to be happening. Because silence has a way of making people question everything. They assume that because they cannot see movement, no movement exists. But beneath every meaningful transformation, there is an invisible season where the deepest changes are taking place. Just like a seed resting beneath the soil, your future is often developing long before it ever breaks through the surface. And if you can understand why that invisible season matters, you'll begin to recognize the second sign that you're about to be tested into greatness in a way that most people never do. The second sign often surprises people because it doesn't arrive with excitement. It arrives with silence, not the peaceful kind of silence you enjoy on a quiet morning. The kind that makes you wonder if you've been talking to yourself all along. The kind that tempts you to believe nothing is changing because nothing dramatic is happening. This is where many people quietly abandon the very future they've been asking for, not because they lost their ability, not because they weren't worthy, but because they mistook stillness for absence. Think about how quickly the human mind wants proof. We want immediate confirmation that every effort matters. We want every positive thought to produce an instant result. We want every decision to be rewarded before we've had time to become the person capable of sustaining it. But life has never worked that way. The greatest transformations are almost always invisible before they become undeniable. A river doesn't carve through a mountain in a single afternoon. It changes the landscape through quiet persistence. One drop of water seems insignificant. Millions of drops reshape stone. Your assumptions work the same way. One empowering thought may not seem powerful. One peaceful reaction may not appear life-changing. One decision to stop entertaining fear may feel ordinary. Yet these small moments are never isolated. They accumulate. They become habits. Habits become identity. Identity eventually becomes experience. The world responds not to what you occasionally think, but to who you consistently believe yourself to be. This is why the waiting season is never wasted. It reveals whether you're committed to becoming someone new or simply hoping for different circumstances while remaining the same person inside. There's an important difference. Many people want a new life. Very few are willing to adopt a new identity before that life appears. Imagine someone planting a garden. The first morning after planting seeds, they rush outside expecting flowers. They see only dirt. The second morning, they become impatient. The third morning, they convince themselves nothing is growing. Finally, they dig up the soil to check whether the seeds are working. In doing so, they interrupt the very process they were hoping to witness. This is exactly what happens in the mind. People plant a new assumption. I am worthy. I am abundant. I am becoming the person I was created to be. Then, only days later, they begin digging up those seeds with questions. What if none of this works? What if I'm fooling myself? What if my old life is all I'll ever have? Every fearful question unsettles the soil. Every desperate search for proof delays the peace they seek. The test isn't whether you can imagine a better future once. The test is whether you can protect that vision when your senses insist. Nothing has changed. This is where emotional maturity begins. Most people allow their emotions to become servants of their circumstances. If something good happens, they feel hopeful. If something disappointing happens, they feel defeated. Their inner world rises and falls with every external event. But there comes a moment when you realize something extraordinary. Your emotions don't have to obey your circumstances. Your emotions can begin obeying your chosen identity. That doesn't mean pretending difficulties don't exist. It means refusing to let temporary appearances define permanent belief. There is tremendous freedom in that realization. Because once your peace no longer depends on external confirmation, you stop living as a prisoner of appearances. You begin living from something much deeper. You start asking different questions. Instead of asking, why isn't this happening? You begin asking, who am I becoming while this unfolds? That single question changes everything. Because your greatest reward is never the thing you receive. It's the person you become capable of receiving it. Imagine handing enormous responsibility to someone who constantly doubts themselves. Even if they were given every opportunity, their own insecurity would eventually sabotage it. Now, imagine someone whose confidence comes from within. They don't panic when circumstances shift. They don't lose themselves when opinions change. They don't abandon their direction because one obstacle appears. That person carries stability wherever they go. Greatness requires that kind of stability, not perfection, stability. And stability is developed through testing. Consider a compass. Storms may blow from every direction. Clouds may cover the sky. Mountains may block the view. Yet the compass quietly continues pointing north. It doesn't argue with the weather. It doesn't panic because visibility decreases. Its direction remains unchanged. Your consciousness can become like that compass. The opinions of others may shift. Temporary setbacks may appear. Unexpected delays may test your patience. But your inner direction remains steady because you've stopped allowing appearances to redefine your identity. This is where people begin noticing something remarkable. The same situations that once created anxiety now produce calm. The same criticism that once shattered confidence now passes through without leaving a wound. The same uncertainty that once created fear now becomes an invitation to trust more deeply. What changed? Not the world. You did. And once you change, the world begins responding differently. People often imagine that transformation feels dramatic. Sometimes it does. More often, it feels surprisingly ordinary. One day you simply realize that something which used to control you no longer has the same power. A conversation that would have ruined your entire week now lasts only a few minutes in your mind. A delay that once convinced you to quit now becomes an opportunity to strengthen your patience. Someone else's opinion no longer determines your value. You no longer need every door to open immediately because you've learned that closed doors are often protecting you from rooms that no longer belong to your future. This quiet confidence is one of the clearest signs that you're moving beyond your former identity. It isn't loud. It doesn't need constant validation. It doesn't announce itself. It simply remains. And people notice, not because you're trying to impress them, but because peace has a presence. A person who is no longer chasing approval carries a different energy. A person who no longer argues with every obstacle speaks differently, listens differently, walks differently, decides differently. Without realizing it, they've become evidence of the very transformation they once hoped to experience. But before that transformation fully unfolds, there is one final test. It is perhaps the most difficult of all, because it doesn't challenge your patience. It doesn't challenge your confidence. It challenges your willingness to let go. Most people think greatness is about gaining something new. A new opportunity, a new relationship, a new level of success. But before your hands can receive something greater, they often have to release what they've been holding on to for years. Old identities, old stories, old resentments, old definitions of who they believed they had to be. And until you're willing to release those invisible burdens, you cannot fully step into the life that has been waiting for you. That is the third sign, a sign so subtle and yet so powerful that once you recognize it, you'll never look at life's challenges the same way again. The third sign that you're about to be tested into greatness is that life begins asking you to release what once defined you. At first, this feels like loss. A relationship changes. A familiar routine comes to an end. A dream you've held for years no longer excites you. People you expected to walk beside you begin taking different paths. For a while, you may wonder why everything that once felt certain suddenly seems to be slipping away. But here's a question worth sitting with. What if life isn't taking something from you? What if it's creating space for something your old identity simply couldn't hold? Think about a sculptor standing before a massive block of marble. To someone passing by, it might look as though the sculptor is destroying the stone. Every strike of the chisel removes another piece. Dust fills the air. Fragments fall to the ground, yet the sculptor isn't ruining the marble. The sculptor is revealing what has been hidden inside it all along. In many ways, your life unfolds the same way. Every experience that removes fear, pride, resentment, insecurity, or false identity isn't taking away who you are. It's uncovering who you've always been beneath those layers. Most people resist this process because they've confused attachment with identity. They begin saying things like, "This is just who I am." But is it, or is it simply who you've practiced being? There is a profound difference. Your personality has been shaped by repetition. Your assumptions have been strengthened through repetition. Even your emotional reactions have often become automatic through repetition. That means what feels permanent may simply be familiar, and what is familiar can be changed. This is why awareness is so powerful. The moment you observe a limiting belief instead of automatically obeying it, you've already begun separating yourself from it. Imagine standing on the shore of the ocean, watching waves rise and fall. You don't chase every wave. You don't panic because one disappears. You simply observe. Thoughts can be approached the same way. Not every thought deserves your agreement. Not every fear deserves your attention. Not every memory deserves to become your future. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that because a thought enters the mind, it must be true. But the mind is like the sky. Clouds pass through it all day long. Some are bright, some are dark, some disappear within moments. The sky never becomes the clouds. It simply allows them to pass. You are the awareness behind your thoughts. Not every passing emotion deserves authority over your life. The moment you understand this, an incredible freedom begins to emerge. You stop fighting every negative thought. Instead, you stop feeding it. Without attention, many fears lose their strength. Without repeated belief, old assumptions slowly dissolve. Without emotional attachment, old stories begin fading into the background. This doesn't happen overnight. Transformation is rarely dramatic while you're living through it. It's often so gradual that you don't notice it until one ordinary day when you realize you've become someone your former self would hardly recognize. You respond with patience where you once reacted with anger. You remain hopeful where you once expected disappointment. You trust yourself where you once searched for approval. These changes may seem small, but they represent an entirely different way of living. And here's something beautiful that many people overlook. The world doesn't simply respond to your actions. It responds to the identity behind those actions. Two people can perform the exact same task. One acts from fear, the other acts from confidence. Outwardly, their behavior appears identical. Inwardly, they are creating entirely different futures, because consciousness always gives meaning to action. This is why changing your inner conversations matters so deeply. Listen carefully to the voice that speaks when no one else is around. The conversations you have with yourself become the atmosphere of your life. If your inner voice constantly says, "Nothing ever works out for me," your mind begins searching for evidence to support that belief. If it repeatedly whispers, "I'm always behind," you'll overlook opportunities because they don't match the story you've accepted. But imagine replacing those quiet assumptions with something different. Everything is unfolding in the right season. I am becoming stronger through every challenge. I don't need to chase what already belongs to me. I can remain peaceful while life rearranges itself. These aren't empty affirmations. They're decisions about identity. And identity influences perception. Perception influences choices. Choices influence outcomes. One quiet sentence repeated consistently can alter the direction of an entire life. That's why your mornings matter. Not because there's something magical about the clock, but because the first moments of the day often set the emotional direction for everything that follows. Before reaching for your phone, sit quietly for a few moments. Ask yourself, who am I choosing to be today? Not what do I need to accomplish? Not what problems might appear. Simply, who am I? Allow your answer to come from the person you're becoming, not the person you're leaving behind. Maybe today's answer is peaceful. Maybe it's courageous. Maybe it's patient, maybe it's grateful. Carry that identity into your conversations, into your work, into moments when things don't go as planned. Then, before you fall asleep each night, spend a few quiet minutes revisiting your day, not to criticize yourself, not to replay every mistake, but to gently strengthen the version of yourself you're creating. If there was a moment where fear took over, imagine responding differently. If there was a conversation you wish had gone better, replay it with calm confidence. If disappointment appeared, imagine yourself meeting it with unwavering peace. Your imagination is not an escape from reality. It is the workshop where a new reality is quietly designed. The subconscious doesn't simply respond to what happens. It responds to what is repeatedly experienced within. This is why your inner life deserves your greatest attention. The outer world is always catching up, never the other way around. As you continue walking this path, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop measuring progress by circumstances alone. Instead, you notice something far more valuable. You notice that you're no longer the person who panicked at every delay. You're no longer the person who needed everyone's approval. You're no longer the person who believed every fearful thought. You have become calmer, clearer, more grounded. And because of that, your future begins finding someone who is finally prepared to receive it. Perhaps that's what greatness has always been. Not becoming someone completely different, but remembering the person beneath every fear you've ever carried. The tests were never sent to convince you that you were weak. They were revealing the strength that had been waiting for your recognition all along. So if your life feels unusually quiet, if old habits are falling away, if you're being asked to trust when your eyes cannot yet see, don't mistake these moments for failure. Don't rush to fill every silence. Don't cling to chapters that have already taught you everything they came to teach. Stand where you are, breathe deeply, remain faithful to the person you're choosing to become. Because every great story reaches a moment when the old self can no longer continue the journey. A new version must take the next step. Perhaps that moment is now. Perhaps the pressure you've been feeling isn't here to break you. Perhaps it's here to reveal that your roots have grown deep enough to support a life far greater than the one you've known. And years from now, when you look back on this season, you may realize that what felt like the hardest test was actually the quiet beginning of everything you had been praying for. Because greatness doesn't arrive the moment the world finally believes in you. Greatness begins the moment you quietly believe in yourself, even when the world has not yet caught up.